Hey guys, welcome back. Hello, good morning again. And hope you guys are doing well. We just have a few minutes here until it's 10 a.m. Hey Ketan, good to see you. Janice, welcome. Jerry, Leo, Mia, Brittany, hey everyone. Your email, Ketan? I believe so. Let me make double sure. Oh yes, I do have it. I'm sorry that I didn't hit your reply. I must have just overlooked that one. But not to worry, yes, I do have it. You're just talking about your essay submission. Here we go. Okay, there you go. Yes, I do have it, and I just sent your reply. Good to see everybody. Welcome back, all you guys. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, it's 10 a.m. Let's just get this back underway. Yeah, first of all, thank you guys so much for all your hard work through the semester. And as you know, I'm grading those papers that you just turned in, and I will be done with them for sure by the weekend. Therefore, you can check on your grades once they're ready, leading into the final exam day, which is going to be Tuesday for us at 9 a.m. So Tuesday, 9 a.m. to 10:50 a.m. That's when we will get in this this final exam. So expect a notification from me before the end of the day Sunday, notifying you that the grades are done with the second essay. Oh no, thanks Katan for reminding me of that. I try my best to reply to all incoming messages, but sometimes when there's a big flood of them all at once, one or two can get lost in the mix. But I had your message, and it was just that I didn't hit send on the reply. Okay, cool. So we're here, and we're going to do one more review session, and you guys, I guess, know the format by now. We have a big study guide, which I mailed to you all on the 6th, and I just invite you now to pull it up and direct us towards which questions that you want us to review and talk about. And then we'll try to make the best use of our 75 minutes here today to give you a little bit more guidance and assistance for your final exam. But that's it. So, Celine, describe a possible closed loop of causation involving time travel. Okay, so let's go into that, Celine. You're talking about question on the list. Looking here. That's question 56. Okay, so let me talk about 56. If you guys remember David Lewis's article, The Paradoxes of Time Travel, he presented a couple of different suggested paradoxes that some people make it think that time travel is impossible. And in his opinion, these do not really show that it's impossible. So he's trying to defend the logical possibility of time travel scenarios. One of the weird situations that he talks about, which could happen, would be if there was a closed loop of causation. Do you remember an example about someone who receives a phone call from a person and the person tells them how to build something? Can anybody tell me about this particular example from the David Lewis article? So we imagine a person gets a phone call, and on the phone, the person who's calling tells them, I need you to build something. Do you remember this, and how does it proceed from there? Because this is the example, Celine and others, that is used in reference to that question. So we're going to try and talk about a loop of causation. Okay, yeah, so there you go, Janice. You're taking the story to the next step. I was just presenting it from the first point, which is that the phone call is received. So let me add to it what you've written, Janice. A phone call is received by somebody. The person who's calling says, yo, make a machine. They're like, who are you? Don't worry about that. Make this machine, all right? So they give you instructions. You build the machine based on what the person says on the phone. You let the machine sit in your garage for like 10 years. But then you walk in there 10 years later, dust it off, and you recognize this is a time machine. So then you get into it, the machine you build based on the phone call that you received. And you use it to go back 10 years into the past, to the time that you received the phone call earlier in your life. And you go back so that you can tell yourself on the phone how to make the machine. Okay? Now, can you guys see how this is weird as a scenario? Because it's like a loop. Where did the information about how to build the machine come from in the first place? I mean, it came from the received phone call. And then the information was relayed later in life through a phone call to your younger self. But the information itself seems to like have just popped up out of nothing, right? It's like the information about how to build the time machine is preserved by the memory of the younger person when he tells his younger self later how to build it. But it seems that by itself, we don't really know how to explain where it came from, the information. So that's a closed loop of causation. David Lewis says that these don't really show that time travel is impossible because they're not any weirder in his view than things about reality that we already accept, like the fact that the universe has either been here forever or it started out of nothing. Either one is like a totally mind-boggling thing because it violates all these laws of conservation of matter and energy for it to come from nothing. But it also seems to make no sense, and it violates the principle of sufficient reason if it's been there forever. If you just say, never mind, God is the explanation, that's weird too. How can God just be there with no explanation? That violates the principle of sufficient reason too. But we know that something like this is true, because here we are. So he thinks that the universe is not any really weirder itself than the closed loop scenarios that time travel makes possible. And that's why he thinks it's not a true paradox. If you want another example of a loop, this is one that I came up with on my own. It's a little complicated, but it's like a kind of funny scenario, okay? So somebody grows up, they're like say a boy grows up with his mom, single parent, and she really loves him a lot, she's a good mom. He never got to meet his dad, but she talks about him and she says, yeah, he was a nice guy, but we just had a brief romance. He looked a lot like you, but I just met him, we had a romance, and then he left my life, I never saw him again. So he wants to kind of get to know who that dad was, but he doesn't know his identity or who he is or where he is. So he builds a time machine, and he builds this time machine to go back into the past. Now there's another little plot element for my narrative here. Let's say that his mother has like serious burns all on her face, which she suffered at some time prior to giving birth to the boy. And because of that, she doesn't like to show photos of her old appearance to him because it's like a traumatizing memory for her. So she destroyed all those old images and stuff, and so he doesn't really know how she used to look. Anyway, he goes back into the past looking for his dad. So he goes back to the time when the mom hooked up with the dad to try and meet him and see who he is. When he goes back there, he ends up falling in love with somebody. And he has a brief romance with that person and gets that person pregnant. But he's shocked to discover that the person who he did in fact get pregnant was his mom. He just didn't recognize her because back then she didn't have all the scars. So he's shocked to discover that he's his own dad. You heard me? That's another closed loop. So whatever, you got a couple of examples. But the one from the book was the phone call about building a machine, telling your past self. Anyway, we can keep going then. What's next? Next question. $49, okay. So explain the reason that Descartes uses the method of doubt. All right, yeah, why? Why does he use the method of doubt? First of all, let's say what is the method of doubt. Then you can tell me why he says to do that. What is the method of doubt? We'll start with that. I know we want to get to the questions, but we've got to do them one by one. So we'll get to those next ones, Mark and Alessandra. But for now, about 49. Someone tell me what's the method of doubt. What's that? Method of doubt. Consider to consider anything that can possibly be doubted as false. That's right. Same, Janice. Assume to be false anything that can possibly be doubted. Now, here's a question. Why? Why would I do that? Just for fun? Why would a person assume to be false anything and everything that could possibly be doubted? Descartes says we're doing this for a reason. What's the goal behind that? What's he trying to achieve by doing that? Why use the method of doubt? So you say what the method is, right? Why? Why do it? Undiscover his own truth? You mean, well, I'm not exactly sure what you do mean. This is a strange phrase, undiscover. Once something's discovered, you can't undiscover it. But it's not about his own truth either. So that's not really correct. Hey, Sergio. Someone tell me, though, it's sort of in the ballpark, but I don't know if I would put it that way. Alessandra, Descartes claimed that using this method made all beliefs that come from sense perception, sight, taste, touch, hear, and smell to be doubted. Yes, that's true. But why did he do it? Why does he say, hey, yo, pretend everything's false if there's a reason that you could possibly doubt it? Why would one do this? What would be the reason to do that? In order to discover the truth. You say for himself, I guess, just the truth, period. He's just trying to discover what is true. And he says we need to know what is certain. We need to know what is certain and cannot be doubted. Because in the time that he's living, in the 1600s, knowledge and science is like rapidly expanding. It's advancing at a rapid rate because it had been suppressed by the church throughout the whole Dark Ages, okay? So after the Renaissance, we start to see actual science like pop off, right? Like people are doing calculus. We're learning about Newton's laws of physics. We're learning about the cellular organization of biological material. We're doing geometry and Cartesian coordinates. On and on and on. So there's this like rapid explosion of secular and scientific knowledge, and Descartes is like, let's make sure to make this founded on something that's totally certain. Because the way he looks at it, if we have false assumptions right at the base of our human structure of knowledge, then it might all just topple over and collapse later. So we got to make sure that it's founded on something that's totally ironclad. And that means something certain. So how do we find out what's certain? Use the method of doubt. The method of doubt says, assume to be false anything that could possibly be doubted. And if you do that, like you said, Alessandra, it will eliminate all the things that are even within the realm of doubt, and the only things that could be left over from there would be the totally certain stuff. So why he used it was in a quest for certainty. It's like a process of elimination. The method of doubt eliminates things that are capable of being doubted, and the only thing that will be left behind then after the method has been used are totally certain things. So this will expose to us what's certain by contrast, and that's the goal of using the method of doubt, to find what is certain so that it can establish a base of solid truths for the structure of human knowledge to be built on top of that. Okay, so that's good. Now I'm looking back to the question, Mark, you say 26. So with 26, the question says, explain a basic criticism of utilitarianism other than theory fit for swine. Okay, so with utilitarian theory, which says do the action that will create the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people, there's some that don't agree with that. And can you tell me a basic reason to disagree with this, which is not theory fit for swine, a different one, because that's what the question says, other than theory fit for swine. Can anyone tell me, yeah, what you do think that is? An objection to utilitarian theory, because there's more than just theory fit for swine. In fact, I don't even think that's the best objection, because it's easy enough for him to rebut it. But there are at least two others that are, I think, more heavy. So what is a different objection to the theory, to the theory of utilitarianism? Morning there, Nathan, Devin, everybody else. Question we're looking at is 26, and what we're asking is, okay, good, Brandon, no type of action is absolutely forbidden in principle. Yes, Now you would explain that a little bit. So in utilitarianism, it says do whatever you got to do to generate the most overall happiness, regardless of what it takes to do that. So that ends up implying that anything is acceptable as a means to the end of maximizing utility. And also, Angel, yes, someone could say it's too demanding. So let me deal with both of those points. In the utilitarian theory, maybe you should go kill a homeless person and give their organs to 5 more important people so that they can survive. If there's a healthy homeless person that's doing no good for anybody and they're not productive in society, then maybe just kill them, take their organs, give them to other people that are needy and that are waiting for organ donors. Would that be okay? I don't think so. And probably most of you think, no, that would be disgusting and horrible. But in utilitarianism, it's hard to say why it's wrong, because if it's just about creating the most overall happiness, 5 people surviving and 1 homeless guy dying would be more total happiness, you'd assume, than 1 homeless guy living and 5 patients dying. Maybe these patients have big families, they make a big impact in the world, and so everyone would be a lot happier if they all survived than the 1 homeless guy that nobody knows or cares about. But obviously, people have rights, don't they? I mean, people have a right to live, so you can't just say, well, we can use your organs to save more lives, so that's what utilitarianism thinks we should do. So in cases where you might transgress fundamental rights in order to maximize utility, utilitarian theory can't really say why it's wrong. And so that's problematic. Many people would say this is where the theory goes wrong, because it can't ensure that people have guaranteed rights to things. As long as there's more utility to be gained by abridging the right is meaningless. So that's one big issue. No action is totally forbidden in principle. Maybe it's okay to steal, lie, cheat, or whatever, as long as doing it generates more happiness than not. And then too demanding. Yeah, Angel. So the other thing is that, according to the theory, you're not supposed to necessarily pay attention to your own happiness or the happiness of people who you love and care about. You're just supposed to generate the most happiness to all human beings, whoever they may be. But ask yourself, could you really live up to that standard? What if you had a choice between saving a greater number of people that are totally unknown to you versus saving or helping a smaller number of people, but you really love them a lot? In a case like that, the utilitarian theory would say it's your duty to assist the greater but unknown number of people, because there's more happiness to be promoted there. So if you had a burning building full of your children versus another burning building with twice the number of children that you just don't know them at all, then as hard as it would be, I guess you'd be duty bound to go to the bigger group because there's more lives to save there. It's not relevant that you're not as attached to them as the others. But how can anyone really be expected to do these things? In life, we have partiality, and we're not just purely robotic in our moral thinking. So that's another issue too. Okay, so good. Next we can look up to Alessandro. You asked about 81. 81, the last question. Why does Sartre say that each man is responsible for creating all of humanity? Okay, well, Jean-Paul Sartre, very briefly at our last meeting that we lectured on, he's the author from the 20th century from France who wrote about existentialism. And existentialism says, well, tell me, what is the core claim of existentialism? Can someone tell me that? Something precedes something else. That's a little hint for you, but maybe you can meet me halfway and tell me what precedes what in the existentialist philosophy. Something comes before something else. Something precedes, as they say, something else. So what is that little formula? Blank precedes blank. Fill in the blanks. Yes, existence precedes essence, all right? And that simple statement is really the core of existentialist philosophy, but it has to be expanded on a little. So what does it mean to say existence precedes essence? What it means is that a human being, when they're born, they don't have any essence yet. Now, an essence of something is its core, necessary, defining attributes. So the claim implies that for a human being, when you are first born and you start existing, you don't have any defined essence yet. So like a baby that's in the nursery just after the delivery is not sitting there like, I'm a Christian, no, I'm a conservative, no, I'm liberal, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm an atheist, or I love rap music, no, I love indie music, or no, I love EDM music. Like this little baby that has just been born into the world does not have any essential characteristics in terms of their character, identity, or values, not yet. But that will happen afterwards. So existence precedes essence. It's what you're like and the type of person you are fundamentally. It's not there from day one. It happens later. And what they say it comes from, where does the essence come from? How does it develop? It comes from you, they say. It says you're the one who has free will, and so you're making your own choices about how your essence is going to go. So if you're religious or something, it's because you chose to be. If you're an atheist or whatever, it's because you chose to be. If you're a conservative, liberal, moderate, or anything, under the sun, it's because of your free will. And so they really hammer that home. They're like, you're the one who has total control over your essence. Don't blame it on anybody else. Own it, and just acknowledge that that is your essence that you create. Okay, so importantly though, Angel, it does develop over time, but they don't think that it comes from like your family, or that it comes from your genetics, or that it comes from your culture or your generation. It doesn't come from anything except you, the individual, making free choices. And so when you say, I'm like this, but it's because of my neighborhood, or I'm like this, but it's because of my parents' values, that's not true. That's bad faith. Bad faith is when you try to blame your essence on things you can't control, like those things I said. Now, to the question, why does he say each man creates all of humanity? He says that because when you create your essence, you're creating the person that you want to be. But when you do that, you're sort of simultaneously creating a picture of how you think all people ought to be. So it's like your own choices that are shown in the way you shape out are reflective of how you think everybody should be living. So in a way, by extension, it's a metaphor, because you don't literally create all of humanity, you just create one person, you. But by creating that one person that you are, you now place this example that you think anyone could follow, and if they did, you'd be okay with it. So as an example to you, I'm a philosopher who likes to play music, and also I like to exercise and run. Those are some fundamental things about me that matter a lot to me, and I could tell you other things too, my political, religious views or whatever, but just looking at those couple of points, if another person in this world says, you know what, I love philosophy and I think I'll study it, or maybe even I'll become a professor of philosophy, I have no problem with that. In fact, I approve of that. Why do you think I do? Because I made that choice for myself. So how else could I think? If I did it, then when others do it, I'm okay with that, and I think it's a good way to live. So like about you, say you're a Christian. Many people are. If you are, then I would say you agree with Christianity in general, not just for yourself, but for anybody. So when you meet other people that are Christians, you're like, high five, we agree, and that's good, and I like the way you're living. So when you create your own essence, you also agree with all those choices for other people too. So if you're a person who says, I believe in marriage, then when you meet other married people, it's like, shake hands, we agree that marriage is a good thing and you're living a good way. If you're a person who does not believe in marriage, I don't know, you could be a polyamorous person and you think that the traditional institution of marriage is just for the birds. And if you meet other polyamorous people, you're going to say, well, our community is living in a good way because we have shared values. So when you create your own essence, it creates a sort of paradigm of the good life. And that's why to existentialists, there's no one-size-fits-all universal conception of the good life. Each one of us is just building our own little private perspective on the best life through our actions and free will. And that stands forth as the model, as the blueprint. So it's kind of like, to be a little bit basic and simple, you think I'm doing it the right way. So if people want to live my way, they're living the right way too. That's what it means when he says that by creating yourself, you create all of humanity. Maybe I'll read it just a bit so you can see it even more clearly. And this is what he said on that point. He said, in creating the man that we want to be, there is not a single one of our actions which does not at the same time create an image of man as we think he ought to be. To choose to be this or that is to affirm the value of what we choose, because we always choose what we think is good. If existence precedes essence, and we fashion our image at one at the same time, then that image is valid for everybody and for our whole age. So our responsibility is greater than we might have thought, because it involves all mankind. If I am a working man and I choose to join a Christian trade union instead of being a communist, then I am making this choice not just for myself, but for all of humanity. As a result, my action has involved all humanity. To take a more individual matter, if I want to marry, have children, even if this depends on me, I'm involving all humanity in monogamy and not merely for myself. Therefore, I am responsible for myself and everyone else. I am creating a certain image of man, of my own choosing. And by choosing myself, I choose this type of person. Okay, so that's, I think, as much as I can say on that point. And thanks for the question. Let's continue with what you think we should do next. We just have plenty of time left in this meeting, so let me know what you want to go over now. just get into the list and let's figure out the next question. That's it? You just have a few questions? I mean, assuming you have more. Okay, good. Thank you, Janice. 68. The argument from causal closure. And yeah, so let's do that. And then we can go to 51 from there. So the argument from causal closure, Daniel Stoljar, his article Physicalism, he talks about this argument, and this argument is supposed to support the truth of physicalism. This is an argument that's supposed to lead us to the conclusion that physicalism is true. So if you've attended, studied, read that part of the book, you'll know that there are three premises that lead to the conclusion in the argument. And someone will just say here in the chat what the premises were. So we got to go through them one by one, and that's what we're going to do. So tell me about the different steps of the argument from causal closure. Argument from causal closure, Daniel Stoljar. Let's see. What were the different claims in the argument? So you'll see it if you just refer to your notes from that meeting. If you have a sharp memory, I mean, I could just tell it to you from off the top of my head, but okay, there you go, Alessandra. Every event which has a cause has a physical cause. Yes, that's the first premise. Good. And from there, what comes next? Once you have the argument listed, I'll expand on it and explain the premises a little more. But that is the first one, right? Every event that has a cause has a physical cause. Okay, and mental events can cause physical events. Yes, that's the second premise. So we're two steps in. And we got that tricky third premise, but I'm sure you can tell me. The third one, yeah. If an event A causes an event B, then this means there's no other event C which is different from A, which also causes you have an error though, the last letter. So let's try again, Alessandra, because I don't want to have the wrong information in the chat. Okay, sorry. Well, I deleted it just because I didn't want it to appear. Can we retype the whole thing? But you're right there. It's just B, which I'm sure you noticed. If an event A causes B, then there's no other event C which is different from A that also causes B. There we go, correct. So that's the full argument, and thank you. And let me explain each step. Okay, so the first premise of the argument says every event that has any type of cause has a physical one, meaning that because we live in a physical universe, when an event happens, it had to be triggered by something else physical which caused it. And that's across the board, whether it's, I don't know, I've got a book here on this table, and something physical had to cause it to be there. Otherwise, it obviously wouldn't have just appeared there on its own. I'm wearing a watch on my wrist, but it didn't just get there by magic. There had to be a physical process that led it to being here. So the overall point of premise one is just that if you're looking for the cause of something, you're going to find a physical cause for sure, because things can't happen without a physical basis. The second premise says that mental events can cause physical events. And good, Angel, thank you for stating the conclusion. I should have mentioned that. Yes, in conclusion, mental events are physical events. But second premise, mental events can cause physical events. Now, what does that mean to you? Can anybody explain what it means to say mental events can cause physical events? Let me ask about that premise. If you have any words or thoughts about the statement that mental events can cause physical events. What does this one mean? Or think of example if you can. Mental events can cause physical events. What? Explain. Okay, right. So Brandon, if you think of doing an action and you do it, then that mental event caused it. Very good. Yes. It just thought in the mind can lead to physical behavior by the body. An example could be the simple action of talking or snapping your fingers. So if you look at my hand, I'm telling you what is going to happen with this hand. something that only I can really do with this body. I'm going to snap the finger. There it happened. Wow, physically, you saw this hand produce that sound through that motion. But how did it happen? What caused it to happen? Well, we could say it was caused by the muscles and stuff in the hand, and then we could say that was caused by nerve signals from the brain to the hand. But why did the nerve signals get ejected from the head to the hand? It's because I thought. Let me show them an example of what we're talking about. So I think, and then I act. And so thought leads to behavior. Yes, that's the second premise. Now, the third premise says that when you have an event, it's only got one cause. That beneath all the jargon, that's really all it says. If A causes B, then it's the only cause. A is the only cause. There's nothing else. So everything that has a cause has just one. Now, if we combine these three premises, they do imply what Angel wrote, which is that mental events thus are physical events. And here's how the conclusion follows. From premise 1, everything has a physical cause. From premise 2, your behavior is caused by your mind. But because everything has a physical cause, that mind causing your behavior is the brain, and it's physical. From premise 3, since we already know the brain is the physical cause of your behavior, it's just denying that there's anything else that's also the cause. So it says it's just the brain. It couldn't be the brain and the soul. It couldn't be the brain, and like a ghost within you that causes it, because that would be like saying there's two different causes for the same event. But we already know the brain is a physical cause, so why add another one? So therefore, the mind which causes your actions is itself a physical thing. So at least goes the argument. Okay, and looking at another question, Alessandra, you asked about 51. So Einstein's example of moving train. Okay, so now Albert Einstein wrote the paper in our class called Time and the Relativity of Simultaneity. And in the paper, he discusses a case where there's two lightning bolts that strike at separate points on a railroad. And he asks the reader to suppose they were simultaneous, but then he follows that with a request to explain what it means that they're simultaneous. And he says it's not actually quite easy to say what the definition of simultaneous is, because most attempts become circular. So instead he thinks, let us try and give the form of a test that could be performed in order to check whether the two lightning strikes were simultaneous. So how would we determine whether they were? We would place an observer where? Let's walk through his test of simultaneity. So with the two lightning bolts at their two respective positions on the track, we want to determine if they're simultaneous. Where will we put a person to observe? There's an observer that has to be on the scene. Yeah, so he's at the midpoint, right, Melanie? And that's where he will be. So M designates the midpoint on the visual board, and then you've got this guy. He's an observer. He's right in between A and B. He's at the midpoint intermediate between them. Now, let us make sure that he can see the 2 points in space within one field of vision. And since he's equidistant from them, and we assume that the speed of light is fixed, then if he receives the 2 light signals at the same time, he could deduce that they departed from their positions at the same time. Because look at this. The bolt of light, or the ray of light, whatever, that comes from A to M is traveling the same length as the light that is traveling from B to M, because the midpoint bisects the distance. So we have the same length to travel, the same speed of travel, that's the assumption of the fixed speed of light, and they reach M at the same moment. So if they reach the same endpoint, having traveled the same speed for the same distance, that means they departed from their 2 origins at the same moment, hence they're simultaneous. But the same example is then used to show that this is relative, because we next have to mention the second observer that we add to the scenario. So then Einstein says, let's continue to leave this guy here, but imagine that there was a second observer too, who's on a train. And this guy is on the train moving from left to right with velocity v. He's going to bypass the midpoint M prime, and while he bypasses it, this guy is conducting his observation. But since he's got velocity v, he won't remain at rest at the midpoint. And therefore, since the way he views the objects is by the light catching up to his eye, the light's going to catch his eye at different moments. Since light's traveling the same speed, but he's going to be further away from A while he bypasses the midpoint, the light ray from A is going to take a longer amount of time to reach his eye than B. So long story short, because he's moving closer to B, further from A, the secondary observer will see B happening first, followed by A. And therefore, to him, they're not simultaneous. And this means that there's actually no objective fact about the order of the two events. On one account, they're simultaneous to the motionless observer at M. On another account, they are non-simultaneous to the moving observer who's passing through M prime. And it's not so that either one of them is like correct. They just have different relative positions and speeds compared to each other. And therefore, this implies all kinds of very, deep and puzzling things, like that all the moments of time are real because there's no objective order of the time sequence as shown in the example. Okay, so anyway, this is the point of Einstein's train example. It's to show that that simultaneity is relative, and it's also to give a basic definition of what it means for two events to even be simultaneous. Okay, so it's like two lightning bolts, guys in the middle, lightning and light moves at a fixed speed. If he's here and he sees them at the same moment, then he says they're simultaneous. But a second observer who would pass through the scene with velocity would not see them as simultaneous given his direction of travel and his state of motion. And this shows us that there's no answer to the question, are they simultaneous or not? It's relative. Okay, there's no objective answer anyway. There's a relativistic answer, but there's not one that says, like, as a matter of fact, one of them is correct about the order. Okay, so that would be the 51 question. And going up above, Jerry, you asked about 74. So take a look at 74. So this is the objection from consciousness that Turing talks about in his paper. Alan Turing, he claims that machines, computers, whatever, could have consciousness if they could pass the Turing test, or sometimes they call it the imitation game. The game where, you have interviews with a human and a robot, and you're asked to determine which one was which. And in the game, Turing says that if you were not able to get the correct answer about half the time in a series of trials, we should then say that's a thinking machine because it's indistinguishable from a human interview subject. Now, in response to this whole position that means computers would be thinking, there are objections, and Turing tries to tackle some of the objections. One of them is the one here mentioned in question 74, which is that the machine does not have consciousness like we do, because even when it gives answers to questions, it's not really thinking or feeling anything inside. Okay, so like here, maybe let me give you an example. First, I'm just talking about the objection itself before we get to Turing's reply, but making sure the objection is clear in your mind. If I ask you, let me start with the computer example. Say I was talking to a Turing machine, a robot, right, and playing the Turing test. I don't know if it's a robot or not, but I'm asking a question and it actually is to the robot. And suppose my question, because I'm trying to fish around to see if this is a real person or not, I'm trying to get into something about emotions because I think that'll be hard for the computer to answer in a way that sounds authentic. So I ask, hey, can you tell me about like a moment in your life where you were really afraid? Like what was one of the most scary moments in your life? And suppose that the computer gives me like a very compelling, realistic sounding answer. It says like, oh yeah, well I remember being a child one time and I got lost at the grocery store and I couldn't find my mom and I was really scared and I was crying. I thought I would lose her forever. They ended up actually having to call the police to find me and reunite me with my mom, and it was like a big ordeal. So I always remember that. It's one of my earliest memories. It was kind of traumatizing. Suppose you're hearing this, but it's coming from a robot. So it would sound pretty realistic, but the objection is going like into this thought. Even if it gave such a realistic answer, it's not like it really feels or thinks anything inside. It's not like telling you about this is bringing up traumatic memories that are difficult for the computer because it doesn't actually have emotions or feelings. You might think it's just programmed in a way to give an answer that really simulates the type of response that a true human would give, but those aren't authentic feelings or thoughts. Now, if I ask you or another person, a real human with a real consciousness, hey, what was the scariest moment in your life, one of them, and they gave me the same story, it would be painful. It'd be like, oh, I can still remember looking at my mother's face when we were reunited and how shocked she looked and how sad and exasperated she was, and I remember the panic and the anxiety. You might even start getting a little bit heated talking about it or emotional. So you might think that's the difference. When we give answers to questions, it's backed by like internal mental feelings and thoughts and associations and images. But in the computer's case, there's nothing on inside, like in terms of thoughts. It's just output. It's just simulated answers. Now, what did Turing say in reaction to that? That that's not real consciousness because there's no real feelings in there. Well, what he said was that there's only one way to tell whether anything has consciousness. And what is it? Can you tell me that? This is now getting to Turing's pushback. So someone says to Turing, come on, I don't care how they answer questions, whatever, it's still not real thoughts and feelings. But then Turing says, well, you know, the only way you can tell that anything has consciousness is by what? Is by what? There's only one way to check and tell that anything has consciousness, and it's what methodology of doing that? By observing behavior, correct, Angel? Yes. So he would insist that the only way you can tell that anything has consciousness is obviously by just observing it, because you only have the first person perspective on yourself, you know. So when it comes to like the internal feelings and thoughts and all of that, you can only verify that those exist in your case. With every other human being even, all you can do is look at the way they talk, act, and behave, and then judge based on the observable behavior that they are conscious. So if you really think about it, I guess you can't really prove that anybody has consciousness from a first person point of view. What if we're all zombies except for you, and we just behave like we have thoughts and feelings, but in fact, we don't have those? You don't think that's true, and the reason you don't think that's true is because you see our behavior, and you can compare it to your own, and you can see how it's very much the same as yours. So he thinks that if there's only a behavioral criteria for whether things have consciousness through observation, then when the computer passes the Turing test, we should observe its behavior and think of it as conscious because it matches what conscious behavior looks like. I sort of think of his reply here as like, how do you know they don't have feelings? You're not the computer, and if you're insisting that you won't believe they have feelings and thoughts until you are the computer feeling them having thoughts, then this is of course impossible, because you can never like teleport out of your own first person condition to verifying that someone else has the same. Okay, so that's what he says, and that's his response to the objection. So point, counterpoint, response. Turing is like, I've got a test. If computers passed it, they would be thinking. Counterpoint. That's not thinking though. There's no real feelings and thoughts. Response. Well, you can't tell that anybody has feelings and thoughts though, except for yourself, strictly speaking. And what you usually use is just behavioral observation to determine this question. So how is that different from the computer? Okay. So if that makes sense, then we've covered the last Jerry's question 74, and leave you to think of what's next if you want to ask another one or a couple more. Just gather your thoughts, but let me know what you would prefer to speak on next. I wonder if, I always wonder what people actually think. Like, do you guys think machines could have consciousness? I wonder if there's differences of attitude in like a new generation versus, you know, older folks. Anyway, though, Turing definitely thought so way back in 1950. Okay, so Alessandra, 69. Nomological dangler. Okay, not too bad. That one I think is pretty clear. Celine, 76. What makes a human life go as well as possible, from Plato. And then Janice, your question is 25 about how does milk come back against the claim that utilitarianism is just for the pigs and swine. Okay. Ivan, you say you feel like a machine can only be as conscious as the person who created them. But I mean, that would be it. I mean, if they were as conscious as the person that created them, then they'd have full consciousness, because people that create machines are conscious beings. I mean, like, it's sort of like, do you feel more like in the way Turing feels, that once they act and talk and behave like us, then they have consciousness, or that there will only ever be simulated consciousness? It's a deep question, it's something puzzling. But anyway, let's continue with the others. Alessandra, so to 69. Nomological dangler. Okay, so does anybody have the definition of nomological dangler to get us started with this? It's a thing that is blank, blank, blank. You'll tell me what kind of thing it is. What is a nomological dangler? This is from JJC Smart's article. Brain processes. So what do you think? Nomological dangler, J.J.C. Smart talked about it in his essay, Sensations and Brain Processes. There you go, good Leo. It's something that is yet to be explained by science, correct. So they would be like mysteries that science has not yet been able to account for, right? And science overall does not prefer for there to be nomological danglers. You know, it's like scientists would reject the existence of these, or at least hope that eventually those things could be explained according to scientific physical principles. Now, in relation to philosophy of mind, if dualism was true and consciousness was not based on the physical brain, but was rather just based on like a soul or a ghost or something that's not physical at all, like how Descartes says the mind is not made out of matter and it's just consciousness that's pure without having a physical form. If that was what consciousness really was, again, like, you know, a person could die and they'd still have consciousness because the body doesn't even matter. It's the soul that really has this thing that somehow can continue. If that was what consciousness was, then it would be a total mystery from science and it would never be explained because it would be something that's outside the realm of the physical and therefore be outside the realm of the observable. So if dualism was true, consciousness itself, what you and I have, would be a nomological dangler. And since J.J.C. Smart is a physicalist, his whole goal is to convince you that no, consciousness is just a brain process and therefore it's physical, and hence it is not a nomological dangler. It's just another part of neuroscience and physics. So yeah, he raises the topic of a nomological dangler to mention that it would be something unexplained by science, and he mentions that to a dualist, consciousness is a nomological dangler because it's not a physical thing. But his view is that it's better to not concede that there are such nomological danglers, and rather to consider consciousness as a physical process, as a series of brain states, in which case it's not something that's outside the realm of the physical, which he thinks is better than supposing that it's this mystery, or something that is not capable of scientific explanation. Okay? And so then I see Janice's question 25. Someone then tell me, with John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism, there was an objection that says this is a theory fit for swine. And then Mill tried to take on that objection and reply to it. So first of all, who could tell me what is this theory fit for swine objection? Theory fit for swine. So if we could maybe formulate the objection itself, and then we can talk about how Mill replies to it. Why would anybody think that do the action that creates the most happiness or whatever for the most people? Why would somebody say that this is better for pigs and animals than it is for people like us? What is it about utilitarian theory that triggers this response that it's a theory fit for swine? Why, or what's the basis of that criticism? Like how? How is it a theory fit for swine? Why? Well, okay, but Brandon, we're taking it slow though. You're jumping ahead a step. You're talking about what Mill's going to say in reaction to it. But I want to get the thing he's reacting to first. We'll get to that. But you're right. You're basically right. You will make this point that you're mentioning. But the first thing is, why did the critic even say it? Why did the person say, hey, this is for swine though? Why? What's the reason that someone had that reaction? What aspect, element, feature of the theory? Okay, good, Leo, because it's just about pursuing pleasure. And there would be no higher purpose in life, right? Because, yeah, correct. In utilitarianism, the theory really emphasizes and hammers home that you should be focused primarily on always doing whatever creates the most pleasure for everybody. So pleasure, pleasure, pleasure is like the big point of it all. Create more of it, more rather than less. More pleasure, better behavior. Now, someone might seize on that aspect of it and say, what do you mean pleasure? Pleasure, though, is not a right thing for a human to focus on in their life. Maybe if I was a pig, like a literal farm animal pig, then pleasure would be my main thing because I would just want to eat, sleep, sex, roll around in the mud, you know, and that would be it. But I'm a human, and I have a more noble and a worthier intellectual kind of form of life than an animal. So don't tell me to just create the most pleasure possible, because I have a higher calling than a pig, which is focused on pleasure all day, all the time. Okay, so someone says, this is a theory fit for swine. This is like a theory that's telling you to focus on pleasure, but that's what a pig would do. Don't tell a man or a woman to do that. Well, anyway, what did Mill say to push back? And that's what you're putting in there, Brendan, so that's good. In reaction to that, Mill says, it's not for swine, though, because when I'm talking about pleasure, don't you know I'm talking about both higher and lower pleasures? So he says there's more than just the lower pleasures of animals. Now I have to ask you guys to fill that in. So can anyone define the topic of higher pleasure and lower pleasure? What are the two types? If you could quickly just say what they are, then we could mention some examples, and then that's pretty much it. So what are higher pleasures, like the definition of them? And what is the definition of lower pleasures? Because higher and lower pleasures is the core idea that he uses to reject the objection. So what is the overall definition of higher pleasures? Okay, Sophia, good. Higher pleasures are pleasures that only humans can enjoy. So they're exclusive to humans like us, right? And if you can then just follow up, or anyone, with the lower pleasures, now having said the higher, it's pretty clear. The lower pleasures are pleasures that who could enjoy, or what could enjoy? Lower pleasures, anyone? Yeah. Right, and that's also correct, Sophia. So lower pleasures are pleasures that animals that are not humans could enjoy. Now, what are some examples of both? So higher pleasures. Here's some things that are just for us to enjoy, but not our animal friends out there. Technology, literature, philosophy, mathematics, dance, music, film. I don't know, finance, fashion. You know, all the things I'm listing here have nothing to do with animals. It's just about humans, because it takes something as smart as us to even understand half of these things. Like, animals can't enjoy the study of history. Animals can't enjoy, you know, contemplating a mathematical equation, or knowing about global finance, or knowing how like a microwave works. You know, so animals have some pleasures they can enjoy, which are lower pleasures. So what are those? You already know. It's like eating, sleeping, sex, maybe activity, warmth, depending on the animal. Stuff like that. Now, the lower pleasures are the ones that are kind of just crude and animalistic, and maybe that doesn't necessarily speak to the dignity of a human. But Mill says, my theory never said that it's all about lower pleasures. So that's a misunderstanding the critic is making. The critic hears maximize pleasures, and they immediately assume go live like a pig and just have a bunch of sex and eat a bunch and sleep all day. But that's not what Mill says. He says, I'm advocating for the maximization of all pleasures, including the higher ones. And he even puts a bigger point on it. He says that the higher pleasures are actually even more important than the lower ones. They matter more, and that's what makes being a human a greater condition to be in than the life of a dog, or cat, or another animal. So, yeah, summary again, Mill comes out and he's like, hey, if you want to do the right thing, maximize the most pleasure for everybody. That's morally the right way to act. Someone says, I don't know if I can follow that or agree with that, because pleasure is something that animals focus on, but I'm a human, so don't tell me to live like a pig. And then Mill replies to saying, well, lower pleasures, sure, that's just for animals, but there's higher pleasures too, and my theory embraces both and even emphasizes the higher ones. So I'm not saying to live like a swine. I'm saying to maximize all the pleasures humans can enjoy, which does include all those noble, intellectual, higher pursuits that are bound up with the higher pleasures. Okay, so then, and Celine, what makes life go as well as possible from Plato? Okay, so who thinks they know? You know, Plato, he wrote The Republic, and one of our last essays was on the harmony of the soul. And he gives his kind of detailed account there of what you should try to do if you want your life to go just as well as the Republic. So any way you can summarize the idea of you know, how you're supposed to live your life according to Plato's account? What makes a life go as well as it could go? What's the best life, says Plato? Being super greedy? No. Being super like emotional and passionate? No. What does he say it is that you're supposed to do? Well, yeah, don't behave unjustly, sure, Angel, but that's a little bit overly broad. I mean, there's a lot of detail that goes into this. The devil is in the details. What exactly are we supposed to do with our soul and the different parts of it and stuff to live well, according to Plato? The three parts of the soul. You got to talk about all of it. You got to say, here are these different parts. Here's the one that's supposed to rule. The other one's just not supposed to rule. They're supposed to like submit and like, you know, peacefully submit. They're supposed to have their different virtues. All that. So you got to say some things about that stuff. What is it? I mean, at least we got to say what the parts of the soul are and which one's supposed to lead. I mean, you read it. I taught it. Therefore, you know it. So just say it. It's just information. That's all. Just got to provide the info. Info's out there. You didn't make it. I didn't make it. It's just stuff people wrote. And you just got to tell us what they wrote and show that you do understand it. So what did Plato say to do with your life if you want it to go as well as it could go? Maybe, I mean, it might take a minute for you to write it. I assume you're typing something that'll take a little bit of time, but it's all good. Well, okay, so Alessandra, you say, is it temperance? Well, why are you asking questions? I need assertions. Because a question means I still don't know. I'm fishing for the information. Okay, so Janice, to have balance between the three parts of the soul, appetitive, spirited, rational. Temperance, courage, and wisdom. Yes, Alessandra, they apply to each of the three different parts of the soul. Do you know which ones? So your appetitive part is supposed to have temperance. You would define what the appetitive part is, and you would define what temperance means. The spirited part is supposed to have courage. And so you would define what courage is and what the spirited part is. The rational part is supposed to have wisdom. Now, which part rules? Which part is supposed to rule? There's one part that rules, and you'll tell me which one, because that's important. That's like one of the main points. So like, even if I was just going to say something like the core idea, let this part rule in your soul. Like that would be like the most shortest answer, but it wouldn't be fully complete, but that would at least get to something important. You're supposed to have which of the three parts running everything. Yes, the rational part of the soul leads. The other parts of the soul are inferior to it. They're supposed to just peacefully submit to the rational part. And what happens when your life is going bad is when the rational part gets demoted. So your like smart intelligence is not running things, but instead you're allowing your like crazy emotions and like appetites to just dominate. That's when your life's not going well. So let the rational part lead with wisdom and preside over the courageous, spirited nature and over the temperate, appetitive nature. And in that way, your soul will function just as well as the ideal republic, where the kings preside over the merchants and the warriors and don't allow them to overthrow them or challenge their rule. So defer to your rationality. Let that rule you. There's a rational part within you. Empower it and make it the king and make it powerful. And allow it to oversee and control your passions and your appetites. That's the best you can do in life. If you do that, he thinks your life will go well. If you don't do that, good luck, but you're going to corrupt your soul and you're going to live a life of internal conflict. So that's not going to be to your advantage, even if nobody knows about it. So that's some stuff he said there. Okay. And you have, I guess, another couple questions, and we can go into those, whatever you want. Let's see. Yeah, Plato's Republic. I mean, while you're just thinking, I guess I'll just talk. It's interesting because it's like, you know, it's not a democracy at all. The merchants, the warriors, they don't get a vote. There's no such thing as a vote. There's just power taken, assumed by means of achieving full education through the Republic process that weeds people out into the different categories and only allows the absolute wisest few to achieve the status of kings. Okay, so next I see Janice ask about 50. Okay, yeah, so tell me, with Descartes' method of doubt, which we've talked about, which says assume things are false if there's any way they could be, with that method of doubt being used, what reason then is it that he says you cannot necessarily assume that any of your five senses are working and maybe that's all false? So how could all of your five senses be incorrect? How could even math be incorrect? How can you doubt that stuff? Right now you think you're watching a lecture on YouTube. What if I told you, nope, none of this is happening actually in reality? How could that be wrong? How could you be wrong about what you think you're seeing right now? That's because that's what the question's about. How is it possible to have false perceptions all together, all across the board? Yeah, how could that be? It's about dreaming, yes. Possible to be dreaming. What if this is all a dream? You know, it was all a dream, the whole thing. You being a student, you going to Cal State Fullerton, you taking a philosophy class, graduating high school, coming up as a kid, your parents, it was all a big dream. You've been dreaming the whole thing. So maybe that's possible. That's the point. If you were dreaming it all, then none of this would be real. You know, like I have dreams, and when I do, I think things are happening in them, like I'm traveling, and then I wake up and I'm just in my bed. Like, nope, none of that happened. None of that was real. So maybe this could be the same way. I know that you don't think so, neither do I, but anyway, it's postulated as a hypothetical possibility, and since it can't be ruled out, then according to Descartes, we should assume it's false until otherwise proven. Later on, he does think that he can prove it. You know, he eventually comes back to common sense by saying that God guarantees that clear and distinct things are true. But anyway, that's a different question. So long story short, we can doubt everything we perceive with the five senses because it could be all a dream, and in a dream, the five senses are not reporting on facts that are true. Now, what about math? He says it's possible to even be wrong about, you know, there being three sides on a triangle, or 5 + 5 is 10. We could be wrong about even basic math, he says, if there was like an evil demon that was deceiving us. He started by saying maybe God could do that because he has awesome power. But then he reverses himself because he says, well, God, even if he could do it, wouldn't want to because it's not good. And that's inconsistent with the goodness of God. But there could be an evil demon or something that would be making it so that you have these false perceptions. And so if that was true, then we can't even necessarily guarantee math. So that's why he says the method of doubt really rules out almost everything, except for that one thing that he does hold on to, which is that you know you exist because you're thinking. That's I think, therefore I am. Okay, so method of doubt, assumed to be false, all that can be doubted. Everything from the five senses could be doubted because of the kind of out there possibility that you're dreaming, but it's possible. And then you can doubt even math, logic, geometry, and trig because maybe there's an evil demon that's deceiving you there. Okay, the evil demon thing, in the modern way of talking about it, I sometimes refer to like, I don't know, like a mad scientist, programmer. Maybe you're living in a simulation world, and the programmer is the evil demon that's making it seem like math has a certain result, but it's not true. Anyway, yeah, the doubts could happen because you're either dreaming or being deceived by an evil demon. Done. So what's next? Whatever you think is good. I mean, I haven't been keeping perfect track of all the questions we've covered. Maybe it's possible that you know we've gone over so many that you're not necessarily looking for more help, but I'm here for you for the next 15 minutes. So whatever you may have, if you have something, go ahead, call it out, and we'll try to cover something if you want. Socrates' example of statues of Daedalus, Kenny? Okay, no problem. Well, let me ask you guys, class. Socrates, in the dialogue called the Meno, they're discussing knowledge, what knowledge is, and why it's more important and more valuable than just having a correct opinion. And this metaphor of Daedalus statues and ropes is supposed to help with that, to help explain why knowledge is more valuable in the correct opinion. So someone help me out with the Daedalus example. What did people think you needed to do if you got one of these statues, and why? So what's up with the Daedalus statues? People thought that if you had one, you should probably get something to go with it. But what was that thing that they said you're supposed to have with the Daedalus statues? And why did they think you should have it? What little extra accessory should you have if you really get a Daedalus statue? This is just info we got to remember. Okay, yeah, so Sophia, you should tie them down with ropes because of the myth that they would run away when you weren't looking. All right, good. Now, what's that a metaphor of? These ropes are supposed to symbolize something, and the statue with no ropes is also supposed to symbolize something about knowledge. So just let's connect these pieces. Ropes equal what? Statue with no ropes equal what? Okay. To fully explain the whole little parable or whatever the hell it is, we just need to talk about what these things are supposed to be representing. So ropes represent what? The ropes are key to the answer. Statue with no ropes, true belief with no evidence, correct. And ropes are just the, you can add that now. Just need to know about the ropes too. Seems like we should be able to produce the information because it's even deducible from what you've said here. If a statue with no ropes is a true belief with no justification, then the ropes represent what? We don't know what the ropes are? Come on, you do know, 100% you know, so I'm not even going to entertain the thought that you don't know. What do the ropes represent? The ropes are justification, correct. So the ropes stand for having justification or evidence. Now, when you have justification, it keeps a true belief from escaping your mind. Just like when you have the ropes, it prevents a Daedalus statue from escaping your property. Okay? Ropes physically tie down the statue so it can't go anywhere. And justification locks down your correct opinions so they don't go anywhere. Now look, you guys are getting to finals and studying for a bunch of classes. And I don't know about any individual person's study or, you know, habits and stuff with school, but this is something that I can relate to, and so I'm sure you can at some level. Have you ever tried to study for a final where you never read the stuff in the beginning, and now you're trying to cram at the end, figuring out the information that you probably should have been digesting for like weeks earlier so that it would sink in? Okay, at the end, when you don't know all the reasons that this stuff is true and you're just trying to like regurgitate sentences that you don't even know what they mean, you don't remember any of it. People can ask you like in a year, what is Einstein's theory of relativity that you learned in philosophy? And you'd be like, I don't know, I kind of just you know, did my best to like say some things, but I didn't really read it or I didn't focus on it. So when you have all the knowledge that comes from having justification, you remember the information, you retain the information. When you study for the history exam, like way in advance, and you read the book thoroughly and you know all the dates and key events, then you're filling in the answers confidently because you know it's not a guessing game. The confidence is from having the evidence in your mind that gives you the true belief. And so when you don't have the evidence, you're just kind of like not going to remember it, and you'd be lucky to even get it right one time. So justification plays a role similar to ropes because it bases the true opinion. It's based on something. It's grounded on something, just like this rope is based and grounded the statue. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to make it a little relatable. You guys know that when you're looking at a question on an exam and you're like, damn, I really should have read that. Maybe I'll guess the right answer, but I don't really know it because I can't remember the reasons. Remembering the reasons and having them makes it something that you know. And you don't forget things that you know. You just hold on to them. You know them today, you know them tomorrow, and you know them 20 years. So knowledge is stable because it's based on something, evidence. When it's just a correct opinion, it's like a guess, and you forget the guess. You don't remember why you guessed it. I'm trying to make that so clear because I teach it so many different ways and times I've taught it, and I just want it to sink in because I do think it's important. But anyway, good, thank you. 257. If a person talks to their past self on the phone, how many people are having that conversation according to Lewis? Okay, so that one you can tell me what's the number of people having the conversation when you go back to 2016 and you call yourself when you were in high school. Now it's you from 2021 going back. You're looking at your high school version from 5 years back. Call them. How many people are on that phone call? Is it 2 or is it 1? You know it's not 3, 5, 7 or something. So how many? It's not 0. So it's got to be 1 or 2. What's the answer that Lewis goes for and why? 1. It's one person, but since it looks like it's 2 people, like visually or whatever, what are the 2 things if they're not 2 people? It's one person, but it's 2 things of one person. What is the 2 things of the one person that are talking to each other? Correct? It is one person. But there's a little extra subtle point to make, to add, that although it's one person, the conversation's happening between 2 different what? 2 temporal parts of that person, right. One temporal part is the stage of them that was existing in 2016 as a teenager. The other temporal part of them is the college age version, that's you, later on in the time sequence talking to them on the phone. Now, when you're not time traveling like us, how many temporal parts of you are there in the world at a time? 1. Look at you. That's the one temporal part that's here right now. There's not another one because there's not like, I don't know, a future stage of you coming back to talk to you, I assume, unless they're hiding somewhere. They don't want you to know about that. And there's also not like a past version of you, I guess, that's zoomed into the future to see you at this age and they're around in the world. But if there was time travel where we were able to double back onto the past or zoom ahead into the future, then you would be able to arrive at times where you already exist, and therefore 2 different temporal parts of the person could communicate. Okay, so it's 2 different temporal parts. It's one person. The reason he says it's not 2 people is because there's a connection of memory between the 2. Like if you went back and talked to yourself in 2016 right now, you would remember being that 2016-year-old version. But if it was 2 people that are different people, they don't have a psychological conduit between each other that has memories. So like I remember whatever I was doing in 2012, finishing grad school, Obama's election, re-election, all that stuff. And if I was going to go back to 2012 and talk to myself then, I would remember being the person who got the phone call in the first place. If I'm calling another random person right now that's not me, obviously there's no memories that we can sort of connect to each other because we're different human beings. Okay, so psychological continuity is the reason to think that it's 2 different temporal parts but one and the same person. And there was the question of 53. Why is time moving a paradox, according to Ted Sider? Well, it's a paradox to say that time moves. Even though everybody says time moves, it's really a contradiction or a paradox because why? Because to define motion itself, we need to refer to what? Can you complete that thought? Time moving is a paradox because the definition of movement involves what? How does something move? What is the definition of a thing moving? If I move my hand right here from point A to like point B, what just happened? For the hand to move, it had to be in different places at different times. There you go, displacement over time. So one thing that's moving through space is moving by altering its physical position in space over time. Okay, so if my hand sweeps through this field of space, that means that the hand is in these different spatial positions at the different points of time that it's moving through. So objects move through space with reference to time. But if we plug the word time into that analysis, it becomes circular. So time moves by being in different places at different times? How can time be at different times? That's now getting us into an infinite regress, a kind of loop. So it's really not explanatory. And he tries to show the concept of time moving in another way. He says maybe it is the present moment that's moving. So like at one time, 11:11 or 11:12 is the present, like right now. Later on, 12:12 will be present, and then 5 p.m. will be present. And since present moment keeps shifting its position, maybe that's what we mean. But he says that's not any better either, because what we just said is that the present at one earlier time is 11, and at a second later time it's at 12. But yet again, then we're charting a graph of the movement of time by assigning it different positions along different time points. And so once again, we're implying that time moves relative to time. So the way of getting out of that whole paradox, according to Sider, is to simply eliminate the assumption that time moves at all and go with the space-time theory, because if it's true, there's no movement to time and everything's just out there. The whole future is already out there. So there's no possibility for anything like moving. It's not like the present moment is rolling from the past to the present into the future. It's just all there. All the moments are all there. So if that's the case, then we don't have any problem to deal with how explaining it moves, because it doesn't. And that's an implication of the space-time theory because of the relativity of simultaneity. Okay, so it's really down to the last minute here, guys. I guess for that reason, there's not much we can say with a minute of time to go. But inevitably, our time is ending. We've reached the end of the semester. But I want to say it's been great to work with you guys, get to know you guys. I'm happy that I could be a part of your education and impart some lessons of philosophy that are interesting to me and that are really historically rich and deeply rooted in Western academic and philosophical traditions. So hopefully you can carry some of these lessons with you through life and at least find it interesting, if nothing else. But we'll end our live stream here, and then I guess you guys can just get ready for the upcoming final exam. As we said, you know that the final takes place on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Until 10:50 a.m. So just be ready to receive the test at that time. And I will finish grading the second paper you guys have submitted this week before Sunday night, so that you can certainly know your score on it by emailing me after that. I'll try to finish it a little earlier if I can, maybe by the end of Saturday. Time really flew by fast, didn't it? Or I guess all the moments have all been set forth, and we had a destiny to meet. But anyway, guys, really appreciate all your work. What other courses do I teach, Sergio, in the fall? I'm going to teach Philosophy 320, which is Contemporary Moral Issues. So if you want to take that class, it's a very interesting class. We talk about all kinds of hot topics like abortion, war, genetic engineering, and stuff like that. So ethical debates in the modern world. And I also teach Critical Thinking, Philosophy 105 in the fall. And I'm also teaching Intro to Philosophy again. So I have those three things for the fall. But maybe you'll see me in the schedule if you want. And in the fall, we'll all be back on campus, which will be nice. So maybe we'll actually have some face-to-face meetings too. Looking forward to that if it happens. I think that's the plan. But anyway, guys, have a great one. And I'll be in touch. If you need anything through email or anything else, just be in touch and I'll try to help you out. In the meantime, then, take it easy and good luck on their finals and in life. And take it easy. I hope you guys do well. Bye-bye.